Wow, it looks amazing.
It does.
I love the way that there are pictures.
It's easy for me because it's so meat themed that my options are limited, which is fine.
When did you become a vegetarian?
When I was a teenager. I never instinctively liked meat, or the taste of it, or the texture of it. So I used to pick out the bits of beef from my mum's casserole and stuff. So
it's not necessarily moral.
Oh no, I could kill an animal. I just don't want to eat.
So that's between you and your lettuce.
Yeah. I could wrestle a pig to death, but I don't want to eat the fucker. It's basically it.
They're very strong, you know, the pigs.
They are actually. They're brutal. I will have some still for you.
That was Hannibal, wasn't it? Remember that the third book in the series?
Oh yes.
Needed to reach for a further stage of horror.
Still as well.
Yes, the pigs.
Yeah,
horrible.
Really.
But isn't that how criminals dispose of bodies? They feed them to pigs.
I think traditionally that's why families in where Konstantin comes from used to keep pigs.
That's what they used to do.
Yeah.
Because pigs can eat every morsel.
Thank you very much.
They eat the bones. They eat everything. They're greedy.
Yeah.
Isn't there an Edgar Allan Poe story where he feeds the remains to the police officers who come to investigate the disappearance of his lodger, and he's killed him and he's eaten him and he has one joint left?
I don't know that one.
I'm pretty sure, he serves up a joint, and the officers are unfamiliar with human anatomy and they
end up eating.
They tuck him in. Yeah, that's right.
It's a big part of the plot of Snatch.
It is, exactly right.
Snatch,
really
Guy Ritchie's follow-up to Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels.
Really nasty guy with the big glasses who feeds into pigs.
Yeah, exactly.
But then it's also
Hammer or something who's got a name like
maybe
that.
Maybe that's what we should be doing with COVID.
Well, what exactly?
Just, be a bit more creative with the accounting.
It's also, though, the denouement Titus Andronicus, isn't it? He kills the two boys and feeds them to their own mother, baked into a pie. It's the ultimate form of revenge.
That is taken from. There is something in the gods.
This is not a good way to start a meal, by the way.
Yes, it is.
There's an early thing in the Greek myths where one of them is punished like a really horrific punishment because he tricks the gods into eating his own sons or something.
Who is it?
And he is the grandfather, I think, of Agamemnon, who then goes to war and brings the troops in to go to Troy.
So what does he do again?
I don't know this story.
He kills his own sons and feeds them to the gods, and I don't think it's even intended as revenge. I think he's just got a sick sense of humour or something. The gods are odd, though, because sometimes they're on this, but they are. The gods are odd. That's a chapter at least, isn't it? But cheers, James.
My pleasure.
Well,
cheers, everyone.
Cheers, everybody.
Nice to see you all.
We're catching up, Giles. Pleasure to meet you, Giles.
Great to meet you, Giles.
Good health. Very nice to meet you, dear boy.
And shalom.
How nice is this?
And shalom.
Yeah, l'chaim.
L'chaim, that's the one, yes.
I'm the only one with no Jewish connections, so this.
My favourite one was, is it Nostrovia, I think? It's like
that's his apartment.
We went across on the Trans-Siberian Railway about 30 years ago, me and a mate back from China, and everyone on board was just drunk the whole time. It was just, vodka, really cheap champagne, and virtually all there was to eat was caviar, supposedly with fish eggs, on toast. And by the end of it, you were ordering it just to get the toast. You literally screamed the caviar.
Caviar is very valuable, there's this old Jewish joke about Russians, an old Jewish couple in Odessa, and the guy says, Sarah, do you remember? We were so poor, we had no bread, and we had to put the caviar straight on the salami. Because the caviar is very expensive and it's a delicacy. But actually in Russia, you don't say na zdarowie, you say za zdarowie, which means drink to your health.
I think these guys might have been Polish. Would that be a slightly different
that
one?
might have been it,
There were two guys I remember in particular. They brought silk back from Beijing. They'd been bargaining in the markets there, and it was piled so high in their. It was the old-fashioned carriages, sleeping carriages with like Murder on the Orient Express. It was essentially they just left a couple of pockets for them to sort of crawl into like caterpillars, and the entire it was like a Rachel Whiteread stack, like that house thing, but done in silk. Just the entire extraordinary. These people were just.
How many days was it to do that?
7 days, and we were 23rd of December. No, about 17th of December. Yeah, left on the 23rd. The Soviet Union was falling apart. It was 1991. And huge queues to leave at all the borders and stuff, and is an extraordinary. It was like being in a Hollywood movie of where we all know history is being made and things are shifting the ground under your feet. But meanwhile, on this train, just like 3 hours of daylight if you're lucky, and even then that was bouncing off the side, embankments, whatever. When you're kind of going through snow anyway, you're almost in a tunnel essentially. And every so often you pull at a station and there'd be some old woman dressed in like 15 shawls who was selling you a potato on a stick, and I mean, it was just, it was so like
and
raw.
then every carriage is full of smoke.
Yeah, smoke,
Full of smoke.
People playing chess and just drinking the whole time, Nostrovia, It just reminded me, there's a Paul Theroux book, I think there may be several actually, where he goes through, thank you very much for appearance sake. And he goes through
Thank you.
India or South America or something on a big long train, and there's a character who's like a W.C. Fields type eccentric who refuses to drink water, just drinks vodka. He's got one bottle of mineral water and that's for brushing his teeth because he doesn't trust it.
Massive on water.
Just gets in the way, doesn't it? Interferes with the digestive processes.
Fish do rude things in it. I don't really like it.
Russia in the 90s was an extraordinary time.
Yeah.
It was just like the whole world changed overnight.
Yeah.
And suddenly
Is that when you were there?
Yeah.
At that time?
Yeah. Well, I was born in '82, so I lived in Russia until '96.
You came of age at the same time as the
coup.
as the country.
Sort of, yes. So there was a coup every couple of it felt like every couple of months, but it was a regular thing. So I remember tanks like turning outside our house.
Wow.
That was quite like part of the natural process.
Was that in Moscow? It was in Moscow. Yeah.
So
they were down on the, was it Gorbachev had it's called a dasher, isn't it? The nice house. Yeah. Was it down there? Half remembering that, where he woke up one morning and he was sort of surrounded by them.
That would have been in the Crimea.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. It was an extraordinary time.
So you were there when the sort of like all that capitalist explosion happened, and suddenly you just like all these oil barons and aluminium barons and people who buy Chelsea Football Club and so forth.
But you were too young probably to
No,
understand it.
I mean I was paying attention to it because my dad happened to be sort of one of these people.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So my dad and like 20 of his mates, the way it worked, and this is the extraordinary thing about it, is they started some kind of building cooperative where they would literally fill in the seams in these concrete buildings, the Soviet buildings. And then within a year from that, they suddenly founded Russia's first commercial bank, and that was normal. Like that you would go from filling in seams between concrete blocks to owning the first bank. That was like, well, you do this and then do that. Like it was part of the normal thing.
There's a book out at the moment. A lot of people are talking about the process by which the oligarchs were established. It's almost like a kind of origin myth. It's like the birth of it's like Satan creating his devil.
Of state assets.
Yeah.
Well, so the whole, I mean, if you think about communism, the idea of it is that everybody owns a small portion of everything.
Yeah.
And then you had to go from that to private property.
But we did that under Thatcher, didn't we? We had, tell Sid.
Yeah.
The British gas. Well, we thought it was different, but actually in reality, almost everything that we privatised ended up in the hands of a handful of institutional investors quite quickly. The idea, I think Thatcher genuinely, possibly some people in the Tory cabinet genuinely wanted a property share-owning democracy. That's always quite a nice idea. People were interested, and of course they're all just interested in a windfall, aren't they? They're
right to buy was the worst of all of that, wasn't it? Right to buy meant, all of that council property. It wasn't, all of that stuff wasn't reinvested in social housing. People bought their council house, then sold it on, and
I had a mate. He had a nice flat. It was his brother actually. He had a nice flat in Leather Lane that it was with the council, and he'd got the rent book. It was like 2 or 3 generations down. Do you know what I mean? He'd been with a girlfriend who'd been entitled to it, and she told him the rent book, and then he got to buy a flat like just off Hope and Viaduct for about 30 grand.
Nice.
Just, unbelievable. And I'm sure that wasn't unique by any means, Terrible transference.
I don't know if
this is how it's done. This is how, because sometimes I hear myself, I go, hang on, you sound a bit left-wing here. But this is how they do it.
So you're not a fan of Thatcher then?
Well, I have a sort of Tolstoyan view of history, which is it happens. It doesn't really care whether you're a fan of it or not.
But the question still stands.
Do I like her? A lot of my view came from what I lived under at the time, which was my father was a fan, my mother was kind of a tepid fan.
Okay.
They were lower middle class, but they liked people to show some sort of industry and innovation and be incentivised to get up on their own 2 feet.
Yeah.
They did not like Red Robbo and British Leyland and all of that business, you know. I think a lot of the things that she was a reaction to are forgotten when they tell the story. Certainly when you watch The Crown, you know, and you see Gillian Anderson doing her extraordinary sort of spitting image type.
What's stuff with her face?
I haven't seen that. But it's funny how they do.
Understand, Your Majesty, there is no alternative.
But isn't she quite an attractive Thatcher? She's quite a sexy Thatcher.
She's like a painted sort of circus girl.
I haven't seen her. I've been told that she's a sexy Thatcher.
Oh, she's Gillian Anderson.
This is the interesting question.
Gillian Anderson
Who is it that found her sexy?
My straight
Alan Clark found her very sexy, didn't he? The defence minister who wrote the Great Diaries. He loved her well-turned angle.
And you mean Thatcher, not
not Gillian Anderson.
They try and diminish her womanhood a lot. They try and pretend she just wasn't a woman. I mean, she even.
Yeah.
They
try and pretend she uses that voice, which she was famously coached to drop by an octave. That she did that at home with Carol and Dennis. I don't think so. I can't believe it.
No, it was Saatchi. Wasn't it? It was her PR people who sort of helped her to coach her voice to go lower.
In the film, the Meryl Streep film, it was Roger Allen, wasn't it, who has himself the loveliest voice,
right.
you know, so he was a good hire for that.
But I saw Shirley Williams talking about this recently, where she was in the green room in the House of Commons, and they had a ladies' green room there. And she was and they were bonding over the fact that they were both women in politics, and Thatcher was saying, you can't let them push you around. So she did have this kind of proto-feminist or feminist.
Oh, really? I didn't know that at all.
She even
That's
says
so counter to the narrative that I've heard.
Yeah, exactly. And she even talks about it in her book about going through the ranks. You know, about it. She's aware of it.
Shirley Williams does.
No, Thatcher does. So she's aware of it.
I mean, Williams is interesting because she was to the manor born, wasn't she?
Yes,
Williams,
she was.
and she, if anything, had
Whereas
to
Thatcher
downplay it.
wasn't.
You know, She was despised, I think, on class grounds, but within the Tory party, and for that, I do admire her, you know. But also, she totally lost the plot. She had that kind of Caligula complex by the end. I think
she's a block to me. She's a block on.
No, I would understand.
She's a block on thinking. I can sort of discuss other things on the one
the
hand
very
and on
first
the
thing
other.
we've discussed.
What, is it because of what she did for the miners and the workers?
Well, I was at university in Newcastle and Durham during that period. So you know,
Well, this is it, isn't it?
I was in the Socialist Worker Party at the time, and it you know, it shapes you in a way.
Well, she was the succubus. She was the evil demon.
But I voted. So the first time I voted for Margaret Thatcher.
Really?
Okay, yeah. And the reason I'm sorry,
that's fine.
And the reason I voted for Margaret Thatcher is because I was SWP, and we all got together in Newcastle University Students' Union, and we decided the only way to bring Kalashnikovs to Glasgow Dockers was actually for things to get worse.
Oh, I see.
And I'm begging your pardon.
So it's like a
acceleration.
Only before things could get worse, and of course Thatcher was going to make things worse. So the first time I cast my vote, I voted Tory.
I see, okay.
You ushered in 18 years! 18 years!
So you've really vacillated on this, because you voted Tory last time as well, didn't you?
So I voted Tory the first time I voted, and I voted Tory last time as well.
Did you live a Brexit?
I voted because I'm a Brexiter.
But do you still, not that I want to get into Brexit, because I would think that would be the single worst topic, but do you have the sort of left-wing analysis of the EU that Corbyn sort of quietly had?
Exactly right. So I used to know Tony Benn a bit. I was mates with him, and I was always gobsmacked that the left, when this conversation started to have, and I was writing at The Guardian at the time, when the conversation started to have about the EU, and I was going, what? You think I couldn't quite believe there were all these people like you were left wing who were suddenly saying remaining things.
They seem to think that the free movement of people seen as a sort of a benevolent distribution of opportunity and liberty to people, rather than regarding people as economic units to be moved around.
I thought it was just a businessman's club. I thought the EU was just a businessman's club, and it was. I wasn't that bothered. I mean, I've become much more bothered about it, but I wasn't that bothered by national identity and things like that, but I'm more bothered about that.
But just to go back, I do think it's interesting, because what you said is exactly the same as what I said. Who you are and where you grew up with at the time, and you're a little bit older than me by the sound of it, because you had a vote in 1979, I was 14. But, you know, it's hard to kind of like create your own narrative, isn't it? You're enveloped in a situation.
Right.
I think anyone who lived through the Thatcher years more than any other time, you know, it was very difficult to form your own opinion.
Yeah, because you're saying that you can't even think objectively about it.
Yeah.
Because you're too.
Even however more right wing I've got, more and more right wing, And the more right I get, I voted Tory last time and so forth. But if you mention the word Thatcher, my critical faculty just disappear, and I go.
What about the?
And I nearly did her funeral. I mean, because I would have been. So, I mean, if I hadn't left St Paul's Cathedral,
that's
I would
not a
probably,
Mossad way of saying an assassination.
If I hadn't been, so her funeral was at St Paul's Cathedral. If I hadn't resigned over the Occupy thing, I would have been there.
How would you have coped?
Really? Wow.
You would have been seething.
Like, I would have absolutely done it, and I would have been terribly professional about it. But I'm quite glad.
No dancing.
I'm quite glad that I wasn't put in that situation. I don't know what, but for me there was like, it was at the time it was too deep in my core.
Yes.
What about
Thatcher,
the
Milk Snatcher, and
What about the Peter Hitchens? You've had him on your show, haven't you? Peter Hitchens has this analysis of it, which I find quite convincing. Although I don't like to dwell on it because it's depressing as well. The abolition of Britain, which was a sort of left-right, a 1-2 between Thatcher and Blair. And she regarded Blair as her natural heir. Basically, he finished the work. And between them, they destroyed everything that was good and right and proper, but sort of everything that was organic. I think, obviously, the church, to some extent, would be the kind of you couldn't. The old stone, essentially.
Didn't you say that New Labour was her finest achievement?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in two regards, I suppose you could say, and that's the ambiguity. Was it just that it recognised that the Overton window had moved so far to the right that that was the only conceivable way a left-wing government could come in? Or did she mean that she actually liked what they were doing?
But does it also mean the presidential style
those
that she
are two slightly different,
Because her style of being Prime Minister, he very much adopted.
Yeah, he did. But coming presidential back and with an eye to sort of almost supranational. I mean, that was the thing. By the end, I felt even then I was at university, I think, roughly when this happened. That she seemed less and less to be concerned with domestic politics. You didn't really feel that she had any interest. She seemed
second term definitely.
Yeah,
second term definitely. Not so much the first.
Not the first. No. Once she'd won the war,
Falklands.
That elevated her. And then there was that feeling. I'd had a thing once when I first got a job. I sold advertising space in a business-to-business publishing house in Soho. And then through a sort of series of odd events, I ended up setting up their list rental department. So you could this was in the early days of direct marketing, and you could pay for the mailing list that the newspaper, the magazines went out to. And it was despised by the rest of the organisation because it robbed them of advertising revenue and it put it into a different bracket. And because it was brand new, I suddenly answered directly to the financial director. And the MD was never there. He was off playing golf every day. So basically I went from being about 8 or 9 tiers of hierarchy away from the top to just like vaulting them over. And it was his little pet project. And the shift in perspective you get at that point, because it happened in one go rather than gradually working your way up, was really dizzying. It was extraordinary, And that's kind of what Thatcher reminded me of. She was somebody who had just moved away. She had no interest in the day-to-day running of the country at all. She was almost like trying to run
by the time she was in her third term, you mean?
Definitely, I think so, yeah. She wanted to shift things on such a sort of monumental level, of such a sort of fundamental, paradigmatic kind of, do you know what I mean?
It was also so wrapped up in the ego, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was ego, and also I suppose it was an awareness maybe of how important the EU was. But
legacy,
all of that.
I mean, to be fair, she was like switched on to climate change a lot earlier than a lot of other politicians were.
I posted a clip of her from, I think it was 1994 maybe. No, not 1994. I can't remember, but like a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it's literally a two-minute clip of
her.
her.
Doesn't seem that long.
Duran's latest hit.
I don't remember when exactly it was, but from a very long time ago.
Ages ago.
When some of us weren't even born then.
Last century still means Gladstone to me. So it always will.
Oh, my younger sister said to me, "Oh, of course, you were born in the last century, weren't you?"
Yeah.
Last millennium.
The last millennium.
And after 20 years, you've kind of got to say that's true. I mean, for 2 or 3 years, it was muddy, but
now it's the late 20th century.
It's a fact. Yeah, I think so.
What did you say?
She's talking about the European Union, and she's saying that if the way, and a reminder, I voted Remain, if things continue the way they are, then the problems that we had, this was around the ERM problem.
Yes.
Then what you're going to see is the rise of nationalistic parties, fueled by fears of mass immigration.
Yeah.
Sure. And she literally just banged out all the problems we've been talking about for the last 4 years.
Her problem was federalism, and she didn't. She
and also the poll tax, which I personally didn't think should have been quite as much of a neutron bomb as it was, but it was. So
it did upset people.
Yeah, it really did.
I was too young. I didn't really understand
that
what that was all
activated
about.
your guys, right?
Yeah. How old are you?
So I'm 42 now.
Okay.
So I didn't know. I was at primary school when the poll tax thing. I remember the riots. I remember the agitation.
To activate people. I think the thing with young people, I mean, this is not as derogatory as it will initially sound, but I do think there is a parallel or a correlation between political activation and criminality in this respect, that it's a passion that afflicts you, but roughly between the 17 to 25, men in particular, their hormones are surging, they want to make a name for themselves. If you don't have the money to have the fast car and everything, that's the point at which you turn to crime in order to.
But this is
and political activism also appeals to you at that point. You're having some engagement, and so you have to be really careful when you directly attack their interests. I mean, I was at Southampton University. It wasn't as political probably as Durham or Newcastle, but it was always when grants were attacked. It was always when housing benefit was attacked. Anything that we basically felt was going to be, and this is why, to be honest, I said to you on the last podcast we did with trigonometry, I am waiting for the young to realise just how much they've been fucked over by the government's response to coronavirus. It's been so weighted towards the elderly.
But it's incredible how the moral.
Why aren't they out already? They channel it all towards BLM, which is an irrelevance, and this is why woke capital loves BLM, because it can pretend it's all about that and not.
But it seems to me like the cultural, the being a good person now, having the right opinion, supporting the right cause, has become much more important than actually looking after interests of, let's say, working class people or poor people or young people who've been absolutely screwed over. But as long as you support the right causes, you can feel good about yourself, and then the consequences that are coming down the line for you don't really matter as much, because
it's a terrible alibi. It's a terrible alibi.
I agree.
For legging over the poor. It's a terrible alibi. That's the problem. I have a
legging over. Is that a dog thing?
Isn't that
lifting your leg up anymore? No, I love it though. Legging over. It's much better than the usual more.
But that's my problem. That's my problem.
Is that he's going to come and take your order.
The woke thing, part of me, I don't care about it. But I don't care so much about. I mean, so many of the sort of issues. I perhaps have on the white side, but this is a terrible alibi for the fact that it distracts from the fact that the poor are the people that are being attacked here, and this is why I resent it so much.
Totally.
But a lot.
Look over here. Look over here. 100%.
Look over here. A lot of
black square. Then you're done.
No, but a lot of the activism is coming from the middle classes. It's not coming from working class people.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, they've got better things to do.
And it's also not in their interest to change the status quo.
Very few people act against their interest. That's what people love. I know virtue signalling is tired, but it identifies a genuine phenomenon that people love to look like they're doing good things without it hurting their bank balance.
But it is interesting that young men aren't getting involved in.
I don't mind virtue signalling so much. I mean, it's better than the opposite.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy that people signal virtue. It's genuinely virtue. And so
but then it's not virtue. It's not virtue
exactly
signalling.
Right.
You have to then go if you follow
it's
through.
Actually sort of a form of politically enlightened self-interest, dressed up as aren't I being sacrificial?
Yeah.
When you're actually not. You're just deepening your own interest and your role in society.
Yeah.
Then and I actually. I mean, it's close to quite a Marxist analysis of these things. That class has gone as the analysis of
when did that happen?
This is why I agree with you.
When did class become replaced with, identity?
But that's why we talk about neo-Marxism, because neo-Marxism is exactly that.
Have you heard of bio-Leninism?
No.
This is an account
as in biopower.
He came out, it's called The Spandrel. It's very interesting. It's quite sort of tongue-in-cheek. But anyway, bio-Leninism is essentially, it's like cultural Marxism or the belief that the Frankfurt School were the first to identify, listen, economic conditions in the West are too good. You're never going to get the critical mass to rise up.
Yeah.
What you need to do is create a coalition of the fringes, people who are excluded from the top table, not because of economic fundamentals, because they believe that they can rise. The American dream lives. But if they are fat, or if they are lesbian, or if they are of an ethnic minority that is despised by the Senate, and then we can bring them into a coalition. And this, rather than sort of economic fundamentalism of class, will create the new it's a class awareness in a sense. It's just a different
fabulous
class.
book. Do you know that fabulous book by an American guy called Walter Ben Michaels? Have you ever come across this book? Oh, it's an analysis. He taught at Yale and Harvard and those sorts of places, and he said that you can have every sort of the people he taught with every sort of diversity. It's called the trouble for diversity. Every sort of diversity apart from class diversity. There's no class diversity, but every other sort. And that's the one thing you're not allowed to talk about.
Well, is it?
I propose a truce.
That's going to be great.
So we've done it now. And what my first sort of suggested conversation topic was commensality, which was this word I came across.
This is commensality.
This is commensality. Have you heard of it?
No.
It's eating together, but it is. That's right. Well, it comes from, as I say, I read about my half brother, Michael Bywater, who is from the same father, who wrote a book about the infantilization of British culture. It came out about 20 years ago. It's called Big Babies. He himself, he has said, wasn't satisfied with it, but I think it's really worthwhile reading. And he anticipates a lot of what is getting worse and worse and worse. Everything from, the way you're treated when you're on a train, constantly reminded as if by a nanny. Literally, they call it the nanny state, but it's not necessarily the state, which actually the state is trying to warn you. Sometimes they're trying to minimise health risks. But it's like voices on the train every 3 minutes telling you which station you're coming into, telling which station's coming up, reminding you not to leave things.
It's a general mistrust
Have you
of
got
humanity.
your mittens? I've asked you 3 times now, pick up your mittens. This kind of...
They say, please take all your belongings off the train.
Yes.
Well, most of my belongings are at home.
Well, there's the grammatical errors too. So Michael Bywater, he said the great weapon we have against this is this, commensality. He said, and he has spent some time as a writer in residence at one of the colleges in Cambridge, where he lives, and he teaches English there. And he said, adults getting together, adults who don't know one another terribly well.
The problem you have, though, is a lot of people like being infantilized, and they like being pampered.
Yes.
Also, when did he write this? Because that social media will be a big
it was before that.
I imagine.
Yes,
I imagine.
I don't mind being infantilised about something, so I'm going to speak up a little bit for infantilisation.
Yeah.
Because I quite like the fact that there's all sorts of things in my life. I'm going to be very, very careful how I say this, but. My missus is quite bossy.
Okay.
Apologies if you hear this. But and
got to come to one of your sermons soon.
And I love it. She's the light of my life. But I'm not very organised. She's very organised. She knows where everything is and so forth. And after a while, with that sort of thing, I'll say, darling, where are my glasses? She knows what my glasses are. And actually, that sort of
thing... Do you not think in any relationship, and I've lived in house shares, I'm married to now, and my wife is very much, she has the internal map of the house and where everything is. It's extraordinary. It gets updated every 5 seconds. Mine is like updated once a year if you're lucky, where things are kept. Suddenly you realise this chair used to be in the lounge.
Yes, I have early onset, the same. Exactly right.
So but in every relationship, somebody clicks into that role. I had a house share with a mate who is now, we're both married, and he remains the slob, but at that time he was the slob, and I, it was like the Odd Couple. I was the Jack Lemmon character then. I had the pinion. I was the one going, you do not keep buying peanut butter until you finish the last jar. I was that.
But isn't there a difference between the power dynamic within a relationship in a domestic circumstance and wanting to be pampered and effectively coddled by the state?
Exactly. I'm not married to the state. I haven't chosen to be married to the state.
Which I think is just degrading more than anything.
I've worked out my wife's system. Her system is she keeps things in place until I work out where they all are, and that's when she changes everything.
That's just the same abilities, but a more malicious instinct. But
exactly.
But and it's not just the announcements on the train; it's the colours of everything. It's the way that all our civic architecture now is in nursery colours and is soft, rounded edges in moulded plastic.
There's nothing challenging.
No cast iron anymore that needs touching up by an artisan.
I didn't. So you guys have just introduced me to a new form of grump, which I am very susceptible to.
Proper aesthetic grump.
And that is a grump which I'm now going to have. I'm going to look out for it.
Well, this is Hitchens. This is Peter Hitchens again. And him being the only remaining Hitchens I don't know. He's marvellous. Gradually, people will realise that the Hitchens actually did die in the right order. This will be the greatest blasphemy that I can utter.
He's a great man, actually.
He is, and he's shown extraordinary courage because he goes alone. But anyway, I don't want to go down there. So Bywater's thing was commensality is the defence against that.
Yeah. So what is the idea? It's just adults talking.
I think it is. I think it is literally as in salads, in salt and celery and so on. I think it is taking the salt together, breaking bread together. And it's what we've been deprived of for the last 6 months.
So Eucharistic, it has a Eucharistic, it has that sort of connotation.
Yes.
But we're doing common sense. So it's common table. Isn't Mensa table?
Yes,
it is. So is that right? Am I right?
It is, but I never really understood why they went for it as a title. But yes, I think it is.
I think that's the origins of it. So it's sharing, and it's a word that gets used by certain sort of theologians about what the Eucharist means as well. Which
I mean, I don't understand the Eucharist, but it's obviously very ceremonial now, the way that you normally take it. Does it? I know there's almost that kind of weird cannibalistic, sacrificial kind of element to it.
That doesn't really enter into
No,
my
of
head.
course
it's not like the road.
You will have read Earthly Powers at some point, Anthony Burgess' great novel about.
I haven't actually. It's one of those books that I know I should have done.
It's got an incredible opening sentence.
Yes, that's a bit of a. It's a yes.
What's the opening sentence roughly?
It was the morning of my 80th birthday, and I was lying in bed with my catamite when I was awoken by the butler telling me that the Pope was on the phone. I think.
I mean,
basically.
that's near enough. That's pretty damn close.
But if anything, I mean, having started with that earthquake, it builds to a climax from there over about 700 pages. It's an extraordinary story, and it is about a character who lives across the 20th century, and it's told in the first person. He's very broadly a sort of Somerset Maugham type, somebody who's sort of a bit of an exile due to sexual preferences and so on from British culture, but lives and meets all the interesting people. But his brother, I think, or maybe his brother-in-law or something, does go on to become Pope. And it has a sort of parallel like history of secular and religious. So it would definitely be of interest. I think,
it's like one of those books.
But that has a passage where African missionaries, or rather missionaries in Africa, struggle a little bit with the notion of the Eucharist as to whether or not it is any improvement on their own.
I see.
You know what I mean? It has,
Well, it is essentially cannibalistic, isn't it? I mean,
it is weird.
Is it not?
Let's say it's weird, certainly. Isn't
God, I didn't think I'd be defending this.
No, we don't.
This is the sole purpose of you being here.
Would it
You were brought here for this purpose.
I know, we'll avoid it.
Would it not be better if it emphasised commensality, the Last Supper? Would it not be better if it emphasised that during the ceremony rather than I'm eating the flesh of,
Look, you shouldn't have to represent transubstantiation. This shouldn't have to be your role. It's unfair.
So there is a part of. I can't believe because you're inviting me to be terribly theological.
By the way, I'll defend it.
When there's too much alcohol around, so I feel very vulnerable.
We're going to pull a complaint straw out of it.
But we'll move on. Okay, so it is about participation in the body of Christ. Okay,
yes.
So if you want to describe that in cannibalistic terms, which those who hated Christianity from the beginning did very early on, but for me, it's actually it's about a very internalized participation in something which is, wonderfully.
Because what I would feel, I would say, it never freaked me out as a child. I went to Sunday school. I was sort of like loosely religious, and it gradually faded away without any kind of terrible loss of faith moment or anything. But I do really like all the stories and everything. But I'm always aware that there are deeper meanings, and these things have been given an awful lot of thought by some very clever people over the centuries. Your Aquinas and what have you. And that always struck me as like, if you were going to try and kind of change something slightly to make it feel a bit less weird, that would be the one thing. Because so much of the church is so right and good, and then you have that in the middle of it.
It's the best bit.
Is
You're completely wrong. It's right and good. You can leave that to anybody else. This is the most important bit.
I think you are wrong. I think it's also because, I was told, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that
may not.
That people used to go, we're going back now, but people used to hop from mass to mass to see that bit when the bell was rung and the transubstantiation, that moment, because that was the moment of magic. That was the kind of. Right. And am I right? Is this right, or did I just make this up?
Yeah.
That the phrase "hocus pocus" comes from,
of course,
adaptation.
Hoc est corpus est, when you name it. That's right.
Yeah,
really.
So they saw that that this bread was being transformed into flesh. and they heard the words Hocus
And you
Corpus
put
Man.
I'm going to try and do this now. But
And it sounds like Hocus Pocus.
But you do the left
Yeah.
foot in, the left foot out, in, out. You take it about to do the hokey pokey and you turn it. That's
first
all
course is
taking the
arriving.
piss out of.
Is that right?
Yes, all of the action, the manual actions are taking the piss
So
out
that's where the magic is in the mass. That's what That's where that's.
But the thing with
thank
Hocus
you.
Pocus is, I like Hocus Pocus as in I like using Latin to obscure the true meaning, but it's because the true meaning is so problematic that you need the Latin to...
No, Giles, come on. Defend it.
So the essence of it is,
Wow.
is
Here we
trying
go.
to capture the mystery which can't be captured. So
Right.
the oh my word!
Blimey.
Look at this, this is
Incredible.
like a whole meal. Anyway.
It's uncapturable. So you have to make raids on the unspeakable, as T.S.
look
Eliot
at
said.
that.
You have to try and
Yeah.
try and
Right.
find ways of
Where did you
describing
say
things.
that? I like that.
Ah, it's one of his.
I liked his writing about religion.
Oh no, it's extraordinary.
Four
And the-
Quartets was probably the like cornerstone of what is left of my understanding of where you go to.
I
what-
can
of
see
the
in the
questions
eyes
you
about,
like.
about religion and people like so. You're vulnerable to the conversion.
Wait a minute.
see it in the eyes, by the way.
You're detecting. You're proselytizing right now.
Definitely.
Okay, that's what this is all about for you. That's why you've come here.
I've often thought though, if I was going to go, I have considered like the Catholic Church because of that Hocus Pocus.
Well,
thing. Because of that, like have the
it is
magic,
as well as
although
I
the
say,
high
it's
Anglican-
theatrical. It's camp.
Yes, yes.
You know, it's got all
Songs
that.
from the shows.
Yeah, it really is.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
It is.
I mean, if you were going to pick 3 people to convert, you could have had it easier option.
I don't think so.
I'm already
no,
Catholic. I'm okay.
No.
Have you read
It's always the people who are most
Brideshead
difficult that
Revisited?
go easier.
Yes.
I'm
So I
already
watched
saved.
it as a young man about to go to university, and all I took from it was, it's all going to be teddy bears and
What was
strawberries.
this?
Brideshead Revisited.
Okay, yeah.
And then I read it again recently, and of
very
course it's
Catholic.
really about the Catholic thing. The bomb goes off in the last few pages.
Right.
Everyone drawn back in. The last it's in 3 parts, and the third part is called A Tug on the Thread.
Amongst these two.
And it comes from a G.K. Chesterton thing in Father Brown, where he says people go out, Catholics
right.
leave
Very
the church
good
and they
too.
go out, but
Thank
they
you.
trail behind them a thread, and a tug
Yes.
is all it takes, and they come
Well,
back.
even more converted late in life.
Yeah,
didn't he?
yeah.
Or poped, as they call it. He poped towards the end.
Yeah.
And I think it was snobbery with him. He was guided by snobbery to an extraordinary extent as well.
Well, I knew
But
someone
then
who
so
knew
many
him,
of the
and
great
she said
writers
he was
are.
an absolute monster,
Oh.
a waspish, nasty
Terrible,
old queen.
terrible man.
That's what I've.
Oh,
That's what
really?
I've heard.
right?
Is that
I don't know
right?
about
I think he
that.
was gay, wasn't he?
No, I don't think so.
You know,
Might have been,
no,
though.
but he has that gay sensibility in everything
Yes,
he writes.
yeah.
Which you can spot him, like that archness, that waspish kind of.
He may have had a gay love affair when he was like at Cambridge, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
But Brideshead is full of homoeroticism. You know, he's got that.
Yes, the first third definitely.
good.
Yeah.
And then he has.
amazing.
And then he falls in love with the sister.
Who looks like the other boy.
Yes, absolutely. So in a sense, their gender, although he would recoil from it, is almost moot.
Merged.
Really. Yeah, yeah.
There is a bat squeaking bisexuality, isn't
That's the
there?
word that's used in the car.
There we go.
When he lights a cigarette for her. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you know, Simon, coming back quite a while, quite a way, to what the 3 of you were talking about, which is how your experiences at a certain point almost predetermine your views on certain things. When we're talking about
Yes.
Thatcher. That's why I think I feel so strongly about some of the things that are happening now, because having lived through the early 90s Russia, the fact that things can change dramatically and very quickly
You've seen it.
is a given to me.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah,
if
yeah.
you've not had that experience on a visceral
Exactly
level,
right.
you sort of think that no matter what changes, things will remain the same.
Yes.
And I know for a fact that that is not true.
That's really
Yes.
interesting.
That's-
Douglas talks about that, doesn't he?
Yes,
It's
he
very
does.
big. That's almost
Douglas
like
and I
the
get
main
on very
thing
well
with him.
precisely
Yeah.
for this
But that's why
reason.
people always say, oh,
Douglas
we-
Murray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why does he know that? How does he know that?
Well, he's talking about the
He
Culture
went,
War.
when
But
he
how
was
does he
in
know
his
that
Strange Death of Europe book, he said he spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe trying to understand why they had resisted, well, let's like call a spade, Islamification, Islamic immigration. To the extent that they had, and also were much more sceptical about the EU, although they were desperate to experience the economic benefits of it, of course. You know. And he said it's because they still have a sense of the tragedy of life,
Yes.
the potential for things to go terribly wrong
Exactly.
quite quickly.
And that's how I feel very strongly. And look at the other person who's even bigger than Douglas, who's made waves in the cultural landscape in the last few years, Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson, most people don't know this, but one of the central planks of his worldview, I think, is formed by his study of Solzhenitsyn
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the Soviet experience. Right, so this idea that societies can change very quickly, that they can become tyrannical very quickly, that human beings are capable of great, terrible things.
I believe that's
with very little motivation.
Isn't that why so people are complacent? And they always say to me, "Oh, the Culture War doesn't matter."
Yeah,
because ultimately it's just a few idiots.
One of the things we forget about Solzhenitsyn, or certainly the Bolshevik Revolution, was that it was not the introduction of a new degree of tyranny to Russia. It was, in fact, the replacement of
one form of
one with another. Yeah,
sure.
They did not have the same experience under the Tsar that we used to have under Edward VII. You know, they might have been part of the same family, but actually they already lived. You know, was it Theodore Dalrymple? I don't know his real name, but he writes. He wrote about a book of letters. I can't remember, Konstantin, I think his name was. He was a contemporary and friend of de Tocqueville, who did the same for America. Where Konstantin spent some time in Russia and wrote a sort of diary about it. And he said it's extraordinary the amount of dishonesty and simple lies that people will pay lip service to because it is demanded of them by the state.
Yeah.
If the Tsar, you know, is lame or because he's fallen off his horse, and nobody's allowed to talk about it. You know, I can't remember what the details, but you know what the same sort of thing that you then recognise in 1984, the same kind of thing that you think characterises the sort of things that land you in the gulag. Just speaking the truth, live not by lies, right? That's Solzhenitsyn's big thing, because this is how you get there. You have to be constantly defending it. But it was the same mid-19th century. It's already part of the Russian mindset.
But people would say now that we've reached a point where it is catastrophizing to talk about gulags or to talk about you know, prescriptions against free speech or all the rest of it. But there's that creeping element in our society. There's something that could turn, I think, potentially.
What's that?
The American quote, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. So, I should have chewed before I started saying, but I feel that those of us who have seen it change quickly, or who've...
Well, how quickly did it change from your perspective in Russia?
Well, in the 90s, overnight. It was literally...
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? Yeah.
So today you were a priest, let's say, or whatever, let's say you were a prominent scientist, and tomorrow you were selling your belongings on the street. And I'm not, when I say today and tomorrow, I'm not exaggerating.
We've had nothing like that.
It wouldn't be the same day and tomorrow for everyone, but in any individual life it could happen.
But the trajectory of your life was irrevocably changed overnight by events that were completely and utterly out of your control.
And it's interesting, I haven't read a lot of it, but when I look at Russian literature, it seems to reflect that fact a lot more than British literature does. And not just like Soviet-era literature, also the 19th century stuff.
Of course.
But also, I suppose, like Dr. Zhivago's, you know, the big romantic things, but also the kind of smaller, more... There's that amazingly dark humour that you get in things like Gogol or whatever, that, you know, have that sense of the absurdity of fate, the caprice of it.
And this is where, I guess, one of the things that might... I mean, I haven't met either of you two before, we've met before, but one of the things that I suppose I'm beginning to understand what has brought us together is a sense that this idea that we're on some escalator of progress, constantly sort of like, everything is always, that terrible 1997 Labour Party, things will always get better.
That's Dareem.
Dareem.
Brian Cox.
Let's not start slagging Dareem off. That's one of my limits, my red line.
Okay, well
my family are from Derry, so it's a big deal.
Okay, by the way, it's bollocks. I mean, like, with knobs on. And it's dangerous bollocks, because if we start thinking like that, and that's part of this whole idea of progress, then what you're telling us, which I sort of understand, the idea that suddenly that all sorts of things that we prize and the way we are human with each other and we're civilized, whatever that means, can suddenly just disappear overnight. And we have to understand the terror of that, and this sort of like idea that we're always just constantly, slowly getting better.
But this is what
and we're always better than the years before us. It really upsets me.
Of course, and it is absolutely why that is a reason why people do get more right wing as they get older, or what appears to be more right wing, as you would say, more they cherish tradition and say, hang on, you know, things can be worse than this. They could be improved, but they could also be worse. So be careful. But the trick, arguably the trick in life, and the political trick, is to identify which aspects of change to be alarmed about. And
but
which
that's
to
very
say,
difficult without hindsight.
You know, this is good.
I just look back at my experience. You know, I said earlier I voted for Thatcher because I wanted to
shake things up,
accelerate it.
I wanted to buy Kalashnikovs and Glasgow Dockers. and I'm sitting here next to someone who knows what that really means.
Yeah. It's very romantic as a young person to say that.
I'm a public schoolboy.
Yeah.
Okay, playing at this game. And there's so many people doing exactly the same thing, and I suddenly look back on who I was, and I'm sort of disgusted in a way with my lack of moral seriousness about the way in which I was playing at this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I was a posh boy, you know, pretending that all this sort of stuff about revolution was exciting and sexy and so forth.
That's because you're distant from it, and you're not actually part of a revolution.
I had no idea what I was talking about. I had no idea what the consequence of it was. I had no idea of my own privilege. No idea.
Sorry to be like totally blunt, but how old are you?
That is blunt.
I'm 56, 7, something like that.
Oh, you're the same age as me. So you were talking about different. I thought you voted in '79. I was surprised. I was 14 in '79. I'm 55. So we must be the same age. 79.
You're 55?
Yeah.
No, I'm older than you.
Yeah.
I'm 56, 57, something like that.
You didn't vote in '79 though. Must have been '83. Must have been the one after the election. Must have been after Falklands, the first one you voted in. Yeah.
It would have been. Yeah, it would have been.
I watched a film a few years ago called The Motorcycle Diaries. I think it's a book as well, and it's Che Guevara's early years. And I think he was Argentinian, and he and his mate went on what was supposed to be like a gap year. They were going to go to medical school and become like well-paid doctors and enjoy middle-class lifestyles. And then they witness at first hand in the backwaters of Argentina the poor conditions in which the poor live and so on. And he sort of sets up a field hospital and tries to cure river blindness or something like that. Anyway, these events change him as a person, and he ends up becoming Che Guevara. And it's a really compelling story, and it's really beautifully acted and shot and everything. But you couldn't help feeling even then they'd romanticised to some extent what Che Guevara became. I mean, it was just presented as a given to you. Yeah. And he went on to become, you know, Jesus stroke Einstein, basically, as far as you're expected to, you know.
This is why
that is not quite what happened in Cuba. I'm not saying it didn't deserve to be kicked over. You know, maybe those tables did.
You get the same with the way Americans romanticise the Northern Irish situation. Very much so. They've got this kind of view of it, which isn't really the same as what the reality is.
Including their new president, by all accounts.
But this is what you're saying, Giles. This is why I really balk, and I have a real visceral response to revision of history. You know, it isn't so much that I care about a statue of Edward Colston or whatever, but it's like the idea that you are judging the past bothers me. The arrogance that you think that you're better, you're morally superior. We're not. You know, we are contingent of our time.
This is right. That I really do agree with. That I do agree with.
And the willingness we have to...
We just have different blind spots.
Even things... And look, we can all say, obviously, slave trader, that's an evil thing, we can all agree on that, but and we have learned the lessons of the past. But someone like Mahatma Gandhi, the ease with which people just judge Mahatma Gandhi and are now trying to tear down his statue, that bothers me, because it's so arrogant. The idea that you have achieved anything close to what he did.
I'm going to be the one that stands up. To some extent, I think that's not a bad process in terms of making people go, oh, I didn't know that about Gandhi.
No, that's fine, but that's just educating someone about the reality of their biography. I mean, look, there were all sorts of issues with Gandhi. I mean, one thing, what was it? He
slept in bed with kids, as far as I remember.
Not a good husband. Not a good husband.
No, he wouldn't let his wife take the medication that would save her life because he didn't trust Western medicine. And then when he came down with the same illness, he took the medication pretty quickly. So there's that kind of things like that. But nevertheless, he did get rid of the British in India. It's quite a big deal.
And well, like, not just that. In fact, I mean that was done around the world. But the non-violent, non-cooperation.
Right. The Satyagraha thing.
That was pretty significant.
It's not negligible.
No. It's very interesting. I read a biography of Churchill recently. The first one I read, really good. Andrew Roberts, who's kind of pro-Churchill, but it's you know, decisive. It's very interesting to see how these issues are bubbling under from like 1890. You know, it's not like suddenly one day Gandhi stopped paying taxes and everyone went, oh God, okay, you know what I mean? There's this kind of way that things rise to a crisis, and that's all that gets stuck in the history books. The 1930s was like an endless debate about that, as Home Rule for Ireland was in the 1880s. You know, the British were well aware for a very long time how problematic and the unsustainable the tensions were.
There were major British forces pushing for a Home Rule. It's not the case that it's just the colonisers greedily holding on to this territory.
We are so arrogant when we look back and we think, we assume almost like something out of a Marvel Cinematic Universe figure appears one day and just smashes the...
But also, Rosa Parks was like the 6th or 7th person that they'd considered for the role of Rebel, right? They had several others, and they
really?
They were filtered. They were filtered out because one of them had an illicit child or something. She was not married, or something like that.
Every so often.
We haven't progressed, and perhaps we shouldn't, past commensality. What is the word?
Commensality.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I always try and put an extra syllable in.
I
did it the other day with chocolatier. And,
it sounds a bit like common sense, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Exactly.
It leans towards that kind of...
It's just, this is lovely.
Yeah. But isn't this what we've been deprived of under lockdown, which is quite interesting because
I
don't actually cultivate or cherish any conspiracy theories about the government wanting to do a great reset. I think some other governments possibly might do. But the effect is so powerfully dystopian, isn't it?
Yeah. So you don't think Bill Gates is inserting
I don't
microchips
think
into our
that,
blood?
although my wife actually does the PR for the Vaccine Task Force, and so I've been
Boo.
really on a nightly basis.
Why did you say boo?
Just for a joke.
Just how much
I lost my sense
No.
just
the ultimate sin rap.
Just the level of incompetence that defines and characterises the, I shouldn't get her into trouble. So, you know what I'm saying. The interesting thing is that it couldn't have been designed better if it had been a dystopian takeover.
Right.
That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
The cabinet that Johnson has had coming into this crisis has been defined largely by last year, which was Brexit, and so if anything, he has those who are less, great reset minded.
We fight the battles, the last battles. We fight the last battles.
That's so true. My God, if there were 10 commandments about understand this about history, that would be one of them.
That's
I
it.
think.
We always fight the battles of the past.
Not just we. I mean, we as humanity, right? Like the whole, Not just a British thing. Although they do sort of teach it as a British thing to some extent in history, or at least I was taught it. Like the British always marching into battle. In last year's battle, literally the battles. They would wear the red tunics long after the Continentals had adopted sort of camouflage, partisan. War and Peace is like kind of huge on that. I mean, my God, it's insane.
You've just read this, haven't you?
I got really immersed in it. And then I tried to do
because it's such a tome.
You almost have to go and live there.
Yeah.
I read, just so you know, I got into audiobooks, and this was my big thing, and I wanted to kind of like have an immersive War and Peace experience, because the book as a reading thing would always just send me to sleep after 2 pages, because you only read at night. So I read an audiobook, that was 60 hours, although I sped it up a bit,
Did you put it on twice speed?
Fast forward?
Yeah, but then they sound like the Bee Gees when you do that.
No, they don't. That's the thing. The technology now, their voice timbre doesn't change at all, it's sliced. That it sounds a bit odd when music comes in the background,
I've never
but otherwise,
heard an audiobook ever.
Well, I really highly recommend them. Which maybe you are not affected by it, but at my age, I do find reading quite soporific, or I get distracted. Whereas an audiobook with headphones on while walking the dog, an hour, and I'm locked in.
Do you absorb it though in the way that you do?
Just to sort of finish it, War and Peace. I read the audiobook.
Wonderful.
You
read the audiobook.
It
was read to you.
The word I use is eared. I eared it because it's the same letters moved around.
To say read, it's like an act of work that you've done, and everybody goes, "Oh,
do you know what? I wrote a piece. I'm going to send it to you. I
wrote
wrote a piece where I address this, and I say, on the spectrum, reading is definitely king. Reading is the highest form of engagement and the most you can meet the author halfway.
Yes.
But audiobooks are much nearer that than like TV adaptations or films.
Okay.
Yes, but the audiobook is still an interpretation.
Yes.
Because of the intonation.
And you do sometimes have to go back, having heard them say something, and go, no, you've said that wrong. You've got the emphasis wrong.
I had to give up on an audiobook because I was so annoyed by the guy's intonation.
So I've just written a book on Jewish-Christians relations, and I've been asked to do the audio book of my own.
Definitely should.
Well, you must.
Yes.
I said yes. So I'm going to do it. But I'd be very interested if I read the audiobook of my own book.
I will listen to it. And I'll give you a review.
And then someone goes, no.
But no, listen. I want to just finish this. So I read the audio. I heard the audiobook. Then I watched the 15-hour TV adaptation from 1972, BBC Two, done in like 20 parts of 45 minutes each. Anthony Hopkins plays Bazooka, really excellent. That's all on YouTube if you want to watch it. I also then watched the 6-hour Soviet Bondarchuk, which is a famous film of it, and also the King Vidor Hollywood adapt, which is a Hollywood Italian kind of thing with Audrey Hepburn, beautifully cast, Henry Fonda. Just
You've experienced it 4 different times.
And then I also listened to a 10-hour BBC Radio 4 adaptation that was put out on New Year's Day about 10 years ago. And then finally, I watched the Andrew Davis BBC adaptation from about 4 years ago, which
so you didn't do things by halves, did you?
No, it was totally immersive. So by the end of it, it was almost like the New Testament. I had all these different readings of it. I had all these different understandings. If you just get one adaptation, then you don't know what the truth is.
You're right. This is the advantage of the Synoptic Gospel.
But yes, you've got to go around it. And War and Peace demands and deserves that level of. And it was like roughly a fortnight. And I'm not working, so it really was like a fortnight's quite, like being in college or something. It was amazing. It was amazing. I was like, these characters were real to me. And when I watched the Andrew Davis one, I promise you that was the most intense, emotionally overwhelming TV experience I've never seen. And it's like you normally watch like a Sunday. It was good anyway.
What year is that one?
4 years ago.
No, I remember.
It was superb. But if you hadn't been familiar with the text, I think it might have been quite hard to follow because it's a huge book reduced to 6 hours. But because it was like a series of scenes about. It was almost like going to a gallery and seeing a series of paintings that depict scenes from the New Testament.
So all
and you get that huge rush of like all of the emotional activity that is in that scene that you already know is then coming at you in a. It is amazing. I mean, it's not something. It's a luxury to be able to do that.
Did you make a conscious decision? Well, it's lockdown. I'm going to read some big books.
You
read Anna Karenina as well.
Eventually, I did. And Anna Karenina, I wouldn't recommend. I know most people prefer it, but to me, it's become more dated. It's all about society's hypocrisy.
And you prefer Tolstoy to Dostoevsky?
I'm going to do him next, but I really haven't done him yet. Yeah. I think he has the Christian. More religious. It's very. I know Peterson says he's probably the most direct route to Christ.
Peterson's very. So I was always very surprised about Peterson because the only thing I knew about Peterson before it all happened was that he was terribly good on existentialism and the Russian sort of Dostoevsky, and also his stuff on the Bible is really. I mean, for someone who hasn't really sort of committed either way, exactly right. But the stuff that he writes about the Bible is really interesting. And so people say to me, what do you think about Jordan Peterson? I don't really know the question really, because I say, what I've just said to you, these things he's very good on. And they say, no, but what about this? I say, I don't know.
Yeah, but then what they're asking
skips
really...
off the track sometimes, but he's a really intelligent guy who is sincerely committed to speaking truthfully.
But they're talking about, what do you think about that one clip I saw in that little interview where he said something about makeup at work? That's what they mean.
I haven't seen that.
Can men and women live together? Well, we don't know yet.
I mean, it's the oddest things, because of the internet, these little fragments of interviews where someone says something a bit gauche and it doesn't quite come across, and he's a clinical psychologist, so he's thinking in terms of the differences between men and women, whatever. And that's what people focus on, not the entire corpus of his work, which is about narratives, which is about,
the corpus of his work is exactly what you said 10 minutes ago, which is that progress is, if not a delusion, certainly not the whole story. And he is so articulate and passionate, and he convinces so many people, like in the moment, they almost have like a transcendent experience watching him.
There is something evangelic about his
quality. I mean, I had that when I first saw him, just delivering lectures to a half-full room. There's an intensity about him.
He's very good on existentialism. When he talks about existentialism, there is a directness about what he says.
But because he talks about it so much, you're bound to find something wrong at some point.
He's sort of all he is.
Dostoevsky, the stuff about Dostoevsky is very, very clever and very intense. And there is a marriage of intelligence and passion. And that's a winning combination. And it doesn't matter about. I mean, I don't really care that there's someone I don't know or never met. I'll never.
But they see him as a threat.
I don't agree with.
He's a threat to progress because he will convince people that it can be an illusion. And normally they're not up against somebody with that much passion and that much flame. They don't see it.
But he's also very brave. He's also very brave. He has the courage to stick to his principles, which is, I think, why he's become such a target. Because anyone who, in this current climate, has the courage to stick rigidly
and the vulnerability at the same time. They see courage sometimes from those sort of tele-evangelists, but they don't have that. They don't have that sort of...
The vulnerability is the really powerful thing. And in fact, I don't know what's going to happen to him in the next few years, but what's happened to him recently only enhances some of his power, which is his vulnerability to some of the stupid things that he's done, drugs-wise, and all of that sort of stuff.
I agree with you.
You know, so I think his vulnerability is actually. It's exactly his power. Really.
Yeah.
But I think one thing is for sure that the perception of him is so far removed from the reality that I don't even know where to begin with it quite.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, the idea that he is just this neo-Nazi alt-right. But
That's me.
Oh yeah,
my God.
They literally say that. And it's a.
I don't really understand.
Well, this is
What is a vegetarian option?
I killed that. Well, okay, so to give you an example, so his publisher in Canada, Penguin Random House, members of staff were crying in the meeting, saying that he radicalizes people, he's a threat to the safety of transgender people, and all this kind of thing, and it's such an extreme. It's equivalent to the way people perceive J.K. Rowling.
Oh, look at that.
That whole thing, I don't want to totally derail into it.
Oh,
that
Rudolph.
is really interesting. I'm going to have to swap a bit of that for one of those to see what's
We'll do it.
That whole thing about claiming safety is the issue.
But look,
you know, it's such a dick move.
Can I inject a little bit of counter argument here? Because I do think it's true, if you're looking at it from their point of view, that he does, quote unquote, radicalize people. And what I mean by that is he changes people's minds.
Yeah. That's not radicalization.
I know, I'm saying from their point of view.
Persuasion.
I agree with you completely, but let me just articulate it.
Okay.
Thank you so much. So, so my point is that if you are of the view that progressivism is the right way of looking at things, and anyone who's dragged out of that by persuasion is a danger to that, which they are, right? They are a danger.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Then, following that logic, anyone who drags people out of that point of view is damaging your brand, which is progressivism, right? So from if you are an ideologue of that persuasion, people being dragged away from your point of view is dangerous. So
what you're describing is just heresy. You're saying this is a heresy.
Absolutely. But that is how they look at it. They look at it as heresy. So from that point of view, this guy's dangerous because he's encouraging people to engage in heresy.
Christmas dinner, isn't it?
Yes, but what you're doing there is you're
You've got more important things to worry about here.
We're talking food.
What Konstantin is doing is he's trying to understand the perspective, but that doesn't justify the perspective.
I know.
They're wrong.
No, I don't. Well, as you well know, I don't agree with them.
But that got plum.
Look at these two.
I don't know.
They've given up all pretense of this being for film in any way.
No. What is this animal?
This is venison, but the flavouring of
that's not veal.
Oh, veal, sorry, it's veal cutlet, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, that's the thing, yeah.
No,
Everything about we've got different,
I actually don't know the difference.
The flavours.
Venison is deer, and
the
veal.
flavours are like a Christmas dinner.
It's beef.
A beef. Oh, okay. I'm so
Veal is if a male calf is born to a milk herd, I think, isn't it?
Beef.
Yeah, it's a calf. It's a
young
calf,
beef.
basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh wow.
I thought that was odd. Yeah.
Anyway, let's come back to my heresy.
Yeah,
point.
let Konstantin make his.
So I've sort of made it, which is that to these people, Peterson is dangerous because he's de-indoctrinating people from their point of view. So you can see why they're upset.
What annoys me is they always go, actually, he's saving a lot of young men from joining the alt-right.
The point of view is progressivism, which is and moral relativism.
Things can only get better.
Number one. Number two, everything is relative, right? Like if you say, you know, you are whatever, then that's what you are, because that's your quote lived experience, which is the most stupid phrase ever, by the way.
In terms of science and technology, it works, right? Progressivism is true. You know, we went from we were talking about this today. It was poor old Chuck Yeager, God rest his soul, died today. He broke the barrier, the sound barrier, in the first time in level flight in 1947. He was a test pilot breaking the sound barrier in 1947. I mean, it's just absurd. But what's really absurd was that was 44 years after Orville and Wilbur Wright, bicycle mechanics, achieved the first powered flight at all. 44 years.
So
we went from elevating man off the...
Is it think science as a
template
for moral progress?
Yeah, exactly. We think we're going that way, isn't it? But don't think we change. This doesn't change at the same pace. In fact, if anything...
Isn't that what Peterson said?
I mean, it's like what Spengler says, it's what Goethe says, it's like Faust, isn't it? It's the you know, the delusion that scientific and technological progress
it's more of
it gets internalised, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
If anything, we are just like toddlers with ever more dangerous boxes of matches.
Absolutely.
Well,
and look at social media, which is one of the points that we were talking about earlier, which is you talk about lockdown being a way to stop us from having this.
Yeah. Not that it was designed that way. I don't believe that.
No, of course. But the consequence of it has been that we have not had this.
Yeah.
But actually, I would argue this process has been happening for probably nearly 10 years now, which is we are increasingly spending less and less time physically together and substituting that with online interaction, which does not have any of this.
No.
And the thing with online stuff is it creates the perception that your worst opinions, and this is your point, Andrew, about Jordan Peterson, your worst opinions represent all of you, right? So if we meet face to face and we have a conversation and we have a relationship, that will often trump the fact that we disagree on certain things. Whereas online, what happens is the first thing you're confronted with is how much you disagree with somebody's point of view in this niche
Well, I think
thing.
No, Orwell said that he didn't like to meet people that he was going to be reviewing or writing about because then
because you like them.
Because you'll like them, and that ultimately that is the boring truth, isn't it? When you meet people, most people are nice, and so you can't monster them online if you know them, and I think that's a big problem is that people don't want to. I had this recently where you were there, Simon. So we did that thing in Oxford, the comedians panel. There was a panel of and one of the comedians, I won't say who, but one of the comedians on the panel, when I went to say hello, she literally looked away. She couldn't look at me, and it's like she decided in her head she decided I was this monster because obviously people have been telling her that I'm a monster, but there was a barrier there. Like she wouldn't even be prepared to even attempt to see if that was right. It became fixed, and I think that's something that's. I mean, not just Jordan Peterson. Broadly speaking, there's a real emphasis on caricaturing people now, and being satisfied with the caricature and not wanting to get to know anyone further. Hence J.K. Rowling. Hence this absurd, monstering, demonising.
Rowling is, I think, almost maybe sui generis because obviously she is sui generis as an author. She's of such vast importance to a generation.
Yeah.
I think they felt singularly let down because they thought that she was their guy.
Yeah.
And
well, to an extent, she was. I mean, she was so on board with so many of their issues for so long.
To me, she didn't transgress at all. I think she was extraordinarily circumspect, really. But
that's the point. I mean, if you read her actual statement, she hasn't transgressed even by their terms, really.
But they wanted her to come out and kind of go.
That doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter. Yeah. But I suppose what I'm getting at is this disparity between the fictional creations that we are satisfied with, and like I've noticed, like for the past few years, as you know, Konstantin, I never used to have right-wing friends, and now most of my friends are right-wing. Okay, now what that does is then you suddenly realise all these people that I've been told for years are evil, vicious, diabolical monsters by people that I've respected in the past. They've said that, and I meet them, and I've discovered they're actually really nice. They're really good people. They just don't agree, and that's all it is.
Yeah. Those of us who are getting more right-wing, I say us, maybe that's only me, but also have to learn that the reverse is true. Yeah. Those people who are on the left are not diabolical monsters, and we have to.
I don't think they are.
No, but we.
I think some of them are.
It's easy to do the same. It's easy
to
do the same in reverse. It's easy to demonise.
But I never assume that about someone. I never assume diabolism in someone.
No.
I don't.
There's an interesting thing I came across some time ago. I think it was in one of Tim Harford's books, who's a guy I did the radio thing with, but he's a sort of statistician and rationalist. It's really amazing, isn't it? And this goes against, I suppose, perhaps the overwhelming correctness of meeting people in person compared to trying to analyse them online. He said that hiring success goes up significantly when companies emphasise CVs and resumes and references and so on, and de-emphasise one-to-one meeting.
Right.
But almost everyone in every department, whether it be public sector, private sector, whatever, flatters themselves that they're really good at meeting people and knowing whether they're going to be right for the job. But actually, they're almost always wrong.
Okay.
They allow prejudice to guide their decisions. So you meet somebody and you think, oh,
they're like me.
They're like me, or they're like somebody I already know and like. And
the biggest predictor is whether they look like you. You tend to favour people. Right? You even tend to favour people if they have your birthday.
I knew I didn't like you.
There we go. But I mean, that's still like
you're okay.
Any similarity. Even there's research that shows that if you have the same birthday as you naturally favour them. It's not to do with
My best friend and best man who's born the day before me.
Right. Well, so this bears it out.
So that poses a very interesting question in my mind, which is those of us who oppose this obsession with inequality in that way, or discrimination, or whatever, prejudice, bigotry, whatever, right? A misrepresentation of it. How do we deal with the fact that human beings actually do think that way to some extent?
What you don't do is try and get into people's minds and change their secret thoughts and and monitor their thoughts, which is what is happening now.
But look at how you've answered my question. You've answered my question by answering a different question, right?
It's a negative. It's much
well, because I can't think of the right answer.
I know. That's exactly right. So those of us who, while accepting, of course, that people do discriminate, etc., but think too much has been made of this issue. It's been blown out of all proportion. You know, I feel that in this country people are being told that they're the most racist they've ever been, that we live in the most racist country ever, when having lived in many other parts of the world, I know that's bollocks, right? Yeah. So those of us who oppose this myth-making, how do we also then incorporate what Andrew is saying, which is that people do favour people who are like them?
Can I suggest an answer?
Yeah,
I actually do have an answer, and the answer is social liberalism. It's in you educate people not to care about skin colour, gender, sexuality, and all the rest of it. Yeah. And the problem is that the current social justice movement is doing the exact opposite, and is going to exacerbate the problem. Yeah. So I think that the answer is social liberalism.
But it's teaching people not to.
It's colour blindness. Is
the really prickly thing here. The third rail in that is, if you continue with social liberalism and you're colourblind and all the rest of it, and then people are able to analyse success and failure and identify group differences, how will you explain that?
Because people are different.
If it's not caused by institutional racism or sexism or homophobia, what is it caused by?
Well, possibly biology, possibly. I mean, if you take, for instance, the obvious example
that then is where
and then you have to admit people are different.
Yeah, but the obvious example is the most egalitarian societies in terms of gender, as we know. I mean, this has been cited a lot, but it's the most obvious example. The Scandinavian countries.
Yeah.
When people have the choice,
they like to do different things.
They do different things. Women become more, and men become more different. The more choice they have, the more freedom they have. So maybe it's just worth recognising that fact.
I don't know. But that's the scariest thing to them, is we're different.
But I'm not I'm not someone who is gender conforming.
Because that's what progress means to a lot. This is where I think I would imagine from a religious perspective, most anxiety is felt, is that what is regarded as progress now, so sociologically, is essentially moving almost to transhumanism, like eliminating anything that might qualify as human nature.
That is an anxiety.
And I think that's what it is.
I hate that idea.
Progress went to a certain stage, maybe, the civil rights movement, whatever, everyone has equal rights, but a certain degree of freedom of association and so on as well. But no, we have to move beyond that. We have to
eliminate the human. See, that's not my understanding of transhumanism. Is the idea of literally turning us into robots, literally curing death. Implanting us with,
and that is terrifying.
And that,
actually,
I mean, my sort of religious fundamentalism absolutely kicks
I'm with you on that. I hate that.
I agree with that, but equally, look at our phones. I mean, we are plugged into them now. If your phone was part of your arm, it wouldn't be any different to what it is now, would it? Really?
Yeah, well, I'm trying not to. I'm keeping my phone out my bedroom and all that kind of stuff.
It is
and you're right to do that, because I do think social media actually rewires your brain.
But it is still a servant. I think.
Is it? Yeah, that's a very good question, Giles.
I hope it is. I think it is. I know what you're going to say. So, what's that film that's on Netflix at the moment, Social Dilemma?
Yeah.
And I found it really pessimistic. I watched it, and everyone was telling me, this is about how social media controls us. How if we haven't checked our notifications for a while, they'll send something out to try and coax us back in. Yeah. And I just felt it was actually quite pessimistic. I feel we have more agency than that. Maybe that's a faith-based position. Maybe I just have to believe that. But I do think we have more agency.
I think we still do now, although I haven't seen the film. It is probably identifying the direction of travel, which is always what you have to try and identify early on, isn't it? I mean, that's exactly what you were saying earlier again, I think. It's one thing to say, oh, this has happened. It's a different thing to say, beware, this could happen.
But we're still making a decision to turn the phone.
Are we?
I think so.
I don't make it consciously, no. I would accept what you say in that respect. When I wake up in the morning, I go into the kitchen, I make coffee, and very often the night before I thought, you know what, half the time when you pick up your phone and start scrolling Twitter, before you know it, you're in a row, or something has annoyed you. Why don't you carry on reading that book you're enjoying?
Yeah. And that is a choice, though.
I get up in the morning and I turn on my phone because without it, I feel like I've neglected. I've like.
See, this is why I have a problem with the whole human beings have perfect agency. I don't buy that at all. I mean, we know, for example, with certain crimes like embezzlement or stealing funds from your company, that largely it's a question of need and opportunity. So if you put someone who's poor in a position where, or needs money, in a position where they need money and they have the opportunity to steal it, a lot of people will.
Okay, I accept this point that, I think what you're talking about is addiction. I accept the point that the social media sites are designed.
It's simply habit.
But habit and addiction are pretty connected. I mean, although there was a...
I would say it's more about unconscious influence more than anything, actually.
Well, there's someone at Twitter who talks about...
Do you know about The Elephant and the Rider? You heard that?
Yeah, Jonathan Hyde's book.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
And somebody else has picked up on that. But yes, anyway, Robin Hanson, the economist.
Sorry, I want Andrew to have the chance to answer this.
Yes.
But
I think it's important. It's just, okay, so I recognise that some of the features of the design of the social media platforms is deliberately designed to stimulate addictive behaviour. So, for instance, the way that you have to scroll down to refresh on Twitter, and then there's a pause which isn't necessary, and they put this pause there because then it feels like you're about to get a reward. There's the anticipation that they build up. It's the same technology that they do with slot machines. So it is designed to I didn't know that. To push you into addiction. And that has been admitted. That's not something I'm making up. That's been admitted.
It's funny, isn't it, how you never learn a new fact about these things that cheered you up.
No. But that said, even with slot machines, I still feel that there's got to be that level of choice. Ultimately, I'm a very addictive person. I have a very addictive personality. And I drink too much and do all sorts of things. But I also know that I'm responsible.
Yeah.
And it's very easy for me to say, well, I've had 2 glasses of wine, I may as well finish the bottle, but it is my choice.
See, this is where the distinction between a useful belief and an accurate belief comes in. It may be a very useful thing for you to believe that you have control, but whether that's accurate or not is very much in dispute. So it's useful for you to think that you are making that choice because it allows you to feel responsible and it allows you to then take responsibility and potentially act differently.
Well,
however,
maybe it's useful for you to think that I think it's useful. You know, I mean,
I heard a
you
thing
can one-up with turtles all the way down. But my point broadly is some beliefs, like for example, as comedians, when we go on stage, I include you in this chart.
Well, it's pretty close, actually.
He's a character.
I'm not funny.
When you go on stage, it is useful to believe that you're the best comedian that's ever been, because that confidence...
I have never had that belief.
Okay. It's very...
Carry on, nonetheless.
I go on judging my audience for laughing at me. That's what I do.
I wouldn't believe that, except that
I wanted to
bring up today, but obviously the conversation has gone off. It is interesting that your 2 biggest profile hits have been
social media
fictional characters, right?
As in
Jonathan Pye and Tanya McGrath. Yeah. I know you are good at doing it yourself.
Something called psychology is going to come.
But I did wonder about whether there is a point at which you kind of go, I am subsumed, my ego is no longer an issue, so I can absolutely invest this character with everything.
But anyway, let me finish.
I need to put that question to you directly, because that is a really good. So you have all those criticisms of social media, but your career's been built on social media.
I know, and I hate social media, and I'm immersed in it in a way that I really dislike. Yes.
Is that right?
I don't know what to say to that. That's just the reality. I get like
I'm not accusing. I'm just fascinated.
Mencken hated the media too, you know. And
did he?
Right. So there's a
well, I mean, he hated the effect the newspapers had on the people.
But I don't. But no, I don't hate it because I think it has this terrible malignant effect on everyone. I know it's bad for society, but I don't see it in that poisonous way. I just hate it personally because I hate the abuse. I hate the playground mentality. I hate the bullying. And I'd rather not be on it. But I'm also aware that actually I don't have a choice.
You do feel you have a choice, or you don't have a choice.
I don't at this
Hang on a sec, but you would just like. I'm going to press you.
You have a choice,
but you talk to me. No. I mean, if I may.
Yeah.
You said before we all have a choice. We all take responsibility and stuff.
Okay.
You gave us that.
Wait. Okay. Yes.
2 minutes ago.
Well, I do.
Look, I'm not being rude. I'm just like I just want to understand.
I do have a choice, right? I have a choice. I could completely tomorrow delete Titania's account. I could delete my own account. I could get off Twitter and all the rest of it. That is my choice.
Would you be happy? Do you think?
Yes. Without a doubt. But I choose not to because I also know, for instance, I've got another book coming out. My publisher would be furious if I just ditched hundreds of thousands of followers for no good reason.
But there is a good reason.
No, happiness is not a bad reason.
Well, no, but here's the thing, though. I am not in a position. I used to be a teacher. I can't go back to teaching anymore. You Google me, and suddenly all this Nazi stuff comes out. and so I can't be a teacher. You know,
it could change tomorrow. Ask Konstantin.
Well,
it's the right question.
I have limited career prospects, right? And I don't come from a wealthy background.
Well, the truth is, as time goes on, as our lives go on, I think there's a good reason why, you know, most of the great novels and plays end with a marriage, you know, because at that point, after that, it's just compromise all the way, isn't it? You gradually, you know, things coil around your ankles, and you know, I'm 55, I've got 2 kids. If I were to say tomorrow, do you know what, this whole racket is just nonsense, I'm not happy. You know, well, that would be a lovely. I mean, in reality, coronavirus is probably the only chance I've had in the last 30 years or going forward.
I think some of Shakespeare's plays would have been improved if he didn't marry people off at the end, if it was a bit more open-ended.
Can I just say, just to sort of like broaden out the main point here, and I'd be really interested to hear what Giles thinks about this from a Christian perspective, because I think the single most intractable problem in human existence is free will. Do we have it or not? It's that is really the.
But I mistrust all kind of deterministic worldviews. I think we have to have it. And if we don't have it, we have to believe we have it.
That's the nub of it. I agree with you there, and I think there's a lot to be said for believing that we have it, even if there's a
which is the distinction I made: useful belief versus accurate belief. Exactly. But anyway, Giles.
No, I don't. Do you know, it's very strange, but everybody thinks that's the sort of like one of the great central questions.
Oh, you don't feel so?
I'm totally uninterested.
Right.
Only because I suppose, if I'm thinking about it, I'm trying to work out what practical difference it makes. Whether, you know, I'm predetermined to order a glass of wine, or whether I don't order a glass of wine. It's like.
Well, I suppose it's the extent to which you feel that your responsibility.
It does make a
difference. Can we punish you if you have 3 glasses of wine? And
yes, you can punish me.
But Charles Wilson, what about individually? If you're a Calvinist, if you're someone who believes that, I can go through life as a juggernaut because I'm already predestined to salvation or already damned, that affects your moral behaviour. It affects your conduct. You know, it's
or vice versa.
Because if you don't believe that there is free will, you can just say, well, literally I can do anything because I didn't have a choice. And by doing so, you make the wrong choice.
I wonder if, I see that. I wonder if that actually is how it works out practically for people, because I think there's sufficient uncertainty about whether we do have free will or not, for it to, like, we look. I mean, in this is a sort of hackneyed religious framework, very, very hackneyed, but. If you think that all my decisions are predetermined, so I'm not responsible, so God cannot be rightly, damning me for what it is that I do, it seems to me that none of us can be sufficiently convinced about the sort of predetermination to really risk the issue of whether God damns us or not. So I think we have to take responsibility. I mean, in practical terms, I think you just divide through by this question. I don't ever feel it. Of course, I feel responsible.
I don't personally. I think the thing is, on a personal level, that's probably where the mystery arrives. Is because on a personal level, I agree with you. I tend to feel like I'm in the sea. Literally in the sea. We live in Brighton, so maybe that's my sort of like go-to metaphor. But that feeling that once you're in the sea, you're in the sea. There's a limit to what you can do. You know, you're going to be moved around. You can do this with your arm. You can do that with your arm. But if you're in a riptide, if you're going, there's an awful lot of external pressure. That I feel that about life, and I feel that about me. But I feel that from a sort of social policy point of view, and how we engage with the rest of the world and the humanity we encounter on a daily basis, there are useful distinctions to be made on how you treat them. There's a thing called I think it's called. God, I can't remember. It's one of those heuristics that that crop up in a lot of books nowadays, which explain how you treat other people. But whatever it's called, it's the tendency to assume guilt on the part of somebody who's done something wrong, but to find a contingency that explains it, a contextualisation for yourself.
Right.
So somebody else who crashes into a child outside the school, you go, bloody idiot, shouldn't have been doing 30 miles an hour outside of school.
Yeah.
But when you're doing it, it's like, well, it was like, I had a bad night's sleep or whatever. There's always an excuse,
Yeah.
if you can flip that over,
I believe in original sin, so of course,
right?
Of course, I flip that over.
The extent you can flip that over, the extent you can always look for some way of understanding what other people have done, and also to some extent go, well, you haven't had a good night's sleep, but still you have a responsibility of duty of care towards your fellow humans. That's a good life. That's a big part of it. But of course, really, it's all still in the air. It's a cloud. It doesn't really rest on rock. You know what I mean? It has no fundamental. It's a philosophical position you can take, but you can't really situate it.
So there's a quasi-religious, for all our stuff.
I think so.
There's a little religious nub in all of that to work on.
Yeah.
And he is. You, however, from what you said, you're not religious, are you?
No.
No, you love it. He is. He is.
So
but
let me
he
tell
looks
you,
the most like Saint Sebastian of any of us.
No. You're quasi-religious.
Let me tell you my view on this determinism versus free choice thing. I think our path is predetermined.
Oh, wow.
But it's a range of paths. So the range is not 360 degrees. You have a range of things that you can do within this. So if you are me, let's say, or one of the three of us, you could have been a comedian, you could have been a teacher, you could have been a politician maybe, you could have been something that involves speaking, but none of the three of us could have ever been an NBA basketball player.
Yes, right. That's all true.
None of the three of us could ever have been some. So the range of choices that we have is predetermined by genetics, it's predetermined by upbringing, it's predetermined by education.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think this is a category error, and you have to narrow it down a little bit before you can speak truthfully about the paradox, because it's not whether or not you can be an NBA basketball player. Obviously, you need to be 6 foot plus or whatever, but it is, for instance, whether or not you could have done your best. Whether or not you could have committed.
You could, and this is my point about the range, which is within this range, you could have been a criminal, or you could have been this, but you could never have been a basketball player.
No, but you're almost into that kind of, funny as it is, you're almost into that kind of, I identify as an attack helicopter kind of mode there. In
what sense?
Well, you're not a basketball player because you are physically not a basketball player. That's a physical reality. It's much more to do with the decisions you make. You can dedicate the rest of your life to becoming as good at basketball as you possibly can.
And I have, and I'm terrible.
but have you got that choice? That's where it gets interesting to me. I think to myself, I really want to educate myself about X, and then when I try, I fail.
But that's
I put the book down and I end up drinking and watching television.
But the only difference is that part of it is unseen.
Yeah.
So whatever is stopping you from dedicating yourself to reading a particular book, it's not the same as not having the rapid twitch muscles or being 6 foot.
I mean, being an NBA player is like, can I walk across the Sahara without water?
Yes, but can you dedicate yourself to a book? May also be like that. It's just not visible to the naked eye.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I think determining your course of action to the best of your abilities.
Yes.
That's where it gets interesting.
Agreed.
The idea we have no choice though is just.
No, I don't believe
it's just.
We have choice for sure.
Hell. It's just hell.
Right.
You have to experience the sense of having choice, and I think, like the overwhelming majority of great traditions, religious and otherwise, have said that we do. We all universally experience life as though we were choosing.
Don't, this is the whole point about Weber and the Protestant work ethic, and about the way how this grows out of Calvinist predetermination. We may be predetermined. This is the Calvin position to heaven or hell, salvation or not, but we don't know which one we are.
No, that's right.
Okay, this is the problem in the Calvinist structure, and so you've got to work bloody hard because work is the only thing that actually can be an indication of whether you're saved or not. So
James is coming in. Can I just say I really agree with that. Carry on, James. Work. To the extent that it's ever mentioned at all in any of the great philosophical traditions, is always mentioned
with regard to Calvinism or
thank you so much.
It's held in high esteem. Freud says it's necessary, right?
Really,
Marx says his whole problem with capitalism is that it alienates you from your work. It makes your work irrelevant, and that is a terrible crime, and I agree with that.
Yeah.
I don't agree necessarily that capitalism is the worst thing for doing that to you, but to the extent that it does do that, that's a crime.
How does it alienate?
Well, because as per Smith, it proselytizes division of labour, because that's how you increase productivity, until instead of making radios or even horseshoes, you are making one particular
piece of
plastic.
You're a cog in the machine.
You're divorced from the output, and you have no idea what's going on.
And you're alienated from your labour.
And he said, rather ridiculously, but I still love him for it, that he would rather be a ploughman before lunch and a fisherman after lunch and hunt after dinner and criticise. Disperse commensality in the evening.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not a way you can't run a society along those lines, but damn right you should aspire to. That's it's kind of ironic when you look at what Marxists and the effect it had on societies, that if anything they were more robbed than ever, but it's very, very
Do you think that's true of the capitalist system, that we've created sort of a society of specialists where people like us actually, who have many different separate interests, find it more difficult to do different things without being seen as a sort of jack of all trades shit?
I think as a comedian, that might be why a lot of us went into it. You have the opportunity to read into different things and find out about them, and if they interest you, you can weave them into your set. And your life is quite varied, and your interests are varied. My best friend Ross, who was born the day before me, I was the only other Jewish boy in the school.
But you were not knowingly Jewish.
I wasn't. No, he quite late in life became a barrister in his early 30s, and he's now at the criminal bar, and he spends his days and weeks, mugging up on some horrific machete-based murder in, a horrible, like gang vengeance thing in Luton or whatever. But the funny thing is, when we come together and speak together in the evening, when we have commensality, we're as close as we've ever been. This hasn't changed who we are. He probably feels he works too hard, and I, over the last 6 months, have been deprived of the opportunity to work. That is a bit of a kind of, but actually, we go over that very quickly. It hasn't turned us into different people. Do you know what I mean? We don't have markedly different issues with the world or the way it's going. We don't think that there are different sets of problems with the world. We actually, there are things we've never agreed about and things we still, but do you know what I mean? It's not actually turned us into different people. And under capitalism, I think we're about as far apart as we could be. I mean, I suppose that's not quite true. Neither of us are in danger of dying at work, or
no, but neither of you do this sort of job. I'm sorry, but the Marxist analysis of labour is when you is that there's a sort of alienation that happens when you are a cog in a machine. So neither a barrister nor a comedian is. You are sort of in control of your own work.
That's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're not just, you haven't, as Adam Smith does, dividing up.
You're not going down
the process, and you're not. Well, I mean, it's not that it's just hard. Going down the pit's hard. It's not that you have connection with what it is that you earn your money doing. If all my job is to sort of add a button to this all the time, and then someone else, and you don't even see the teddy bear that's created, then you have no connection with what it is that you do. Both of you have absolute intimate connection with what it is that you do. So you don't count in terms of alienated labour, both of you.
No, you're right. It wasn't. I'm addressing a slightly different point, and only because it had occurred to me a few days ago. You're absolutely right. It's quite different. We're both professional classes to a degree. We both have a lot of autonomy.
And you're sort of intimately connected with whatever your product is, or whatever. You're not alienated from a comedian and a barrister. Absolutely cannot be alienated from what it is that they produce. Yeah. Whereas that's the whole point about the factory system. It's the narrowness, I suppose. It's the repetitiveness of what he does that I was thinking. But you're absolutely right. It's not comparable to manual labour, and it's quite interesting as well to. I'm a member of a book club down in Hove, and we're reading the Pat Barker First World War trilogy, Generation. Yes. It's quite interesting that as a. Have you read it? The trilogy, yeah. It's very moving, and it's interesting how there's a sort of subtle class analysis going on there, isn't there? It started, I think, and I wonder whether she even kind of did it deliberately to capture the glamour of it, with Siegfried Sassoon being taken into the hospital with his pacifism, and it was his friends were urging him to reposition it as a mental illness because it would be such a disgrace otherwise. But by the second book and the third book, she's moved it on into a much more. There's probably a working class hero. The main character is the guy from the north.
The Eye in the Door.
That's right. Yeah, the Eye in the Door and the Ghost Road, which I'm halfway through now. Yeah. And
I read them at university, so we're going back.
Right, quite a while ago. Yeah.
I've seen the film.
Well, it's really great writing, and it's really interesting analysis of story that's sort of familiar, but the human aspect of it isn't always explored. Anyway, it's quite Marxist in a way. I think it has a sort of understanding the men in the trenches as a that's a class thing as well. The officer and class
seems to me, which I sort of buy completely, is the way in which that capitalism divides up, in terms of efficiency. Divides up labour in such a way that you're objectified in what you do, and you have no connection. You have no emotional, spiritual connection with what it is that you produce, and none of us are in that category. None of us are in that category.
We're not. We're very lucky.
But if you are in that category, that there's something, there is something, that analysis has a sort of like, that has a power.
Absolutely.
Not the answers, but that analysis has a power.
Completely. And it's not just that, it's also the fact that certain people are disadvantaged by the circumstances of their birth. They just are.
Yes.
They just are.
Exactly.
And that's why, the question I was asking Andrew earlier is, I think the culture war has become a war. And the first casualty of war is the truth. So when the right and the left try and, using these terms very inaccurately, but when people on both sides trying to fight, I think a lot of truth gets lost. And that analysis, which is a lot of people are being left behind. Look at the housing crisis in this country. It's insane what's happening, and nothing is being. And the right has no answers, and frankly, I don't think the left does either, because they're both ignoring that issue.
It's a terrible crisis in its own right, and it's also massively complicated by the distortions that London. I don't think there's any other country in the West where the capital city distorts the map.
Paris.
Do you think? Do you think it does? I don't know that it does. Although France is more distorted, I would say, in this regard, that it is more recently agricultural and has lost the legitimacy of that, or at least that as an employment opportunity.
But even Moscow, compared to the sort of vast, snowy, cold bits to the left of it.
One of the great strengths of Germany, anyway, we can agree, is that it's beautifully distributed. I mean, it's like it's like a full constellation, isn't it?
Cheers,
but cheers.
I'm choosing.
Listen, I want to ask. I had a number of conversation topics, and I want to introduce the last one, which will.
How many have we had so far?
I think you've covered them all, like actually
by ourselves.
But this is something I've never asked anyone about this, and it's been like brewing in the back of my mind for about 18 months. I would never normally have watched this programme, but I think it was called Hunted. It was on Channel 4. It was a sort of reality TV show where a number of people who've been pre-selected wait for a signal that they get from Channel 4 to say, right, go.
And hide.
And they have to hide. They have to disappear off the face of the earth. Yeah, they're not allowed to leave the British Isles, but they have to avoid CCTV and all the other kind of things.
Love this programme.
And then Channel 4 have at their disposal a number of detectives essentially, and technocratic detectives who know how to try and find people, and they can they're given a certain amount of cash, but if they use a credit card, that will track them. If they just walk down a high street, that will facial recognition cameras and all the rest of it.
Sounds fun.
And it was really interesting. The reason I watched it was because it is really good. It is. But I normally avoid Channel 4 reality TV shows, but this one I only watched it because a guy called Nick Harvey did the music for it, and he's a guy I follow on Twitter, and he lives in Crowborough, where he posts pictures of giraffes in the park. He's quite a bit of a Twitter celebrity. There was a man on the very first episode. He lived, I think he lived on a farm, or at least sort of in full-on countryside in Kent, with his wife and kids. And as soon as he got the message, he went to a mate about like 5 miles up the road, borrowed his 15-year-old Vauxhall estate, drove up like the M2, M25, M1, M6 to the Lake District, found a friend who had a bit of property there and said, can I hang out in your barn for the next 2 weeks? And he did that all in the first 24 hours, and he was off their radar. Now, he himself is recording that, so we know that when we watch it, but they had no idea where he'd gone. They completely lost him. And he survived in the barn. He only had to last a month. That was the challenge. Obviously, it's not indefinite. And he stayed in the barn. He could shop locally using the cash he had, and he kept his needs local, and just to sort of little village shops. And then suddenly, with no explanation whatsoever, one morning he gets on a train and goes back to London. Like about halfway through, he had about a week to go or something.
Yeah.
He just got on the train, and he couldn't quite explain it himself. He bought a ticket, and they were waiting for him on platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross Station, you know. And he was picked up. Yeah, of course he was picked up on the. You know, I think he even used his car. He had
why? Because he just didn't want to. He couldn't.
No, he was still under the impression that he was trying to avoid capture.
Yeah.
He wanted to see if he could do this as well. I guess that's what he said.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But
the devil makes work
clearly, yeah. I mean, I just thought it was like Crime and Punishment to the extent that I know it. It was almost like your conscience will not let you live. What part of human nature was that? I felt we were seeing something quite profound. He was about my age. He was pretty well balanced, intelligent, but had already detached himself from the system before this TV show.
People want to get caught.
Yeah, well, they want to get caught in all sorts.
I do confession. You asked me before I do confession. I do confession. People have and me too, people have an instinctive desire to confess. Yeah. People have an instinctive desire to actually tell someone else who they are, to be recognised. Yeah. Okay. So what is, and this is about hide and seek, and Freud says something about this, or Freudian says something about this, is like, you play a game of hide and seek. It's basically a game of hide and seek, okay? The worst thing about hide and seek, okay, so you go and hide, is the most terrifying thing, is if no one's actually trying to look for you. Yeah. Okay, it's not being found that's the problem, it's no one caring whether you've been found.
Wilde's most famous paradox, isn't it?
Is that what it is?
The worst thing about being talked about.
It's not being talked
about. Yeah.
You're in the barn for 3 weeks, no one's come and get you, no one's coming to get me. No one cares enough to come and get me. Yeah. Well, that's the worst thing about hide and seek, is if someone isn't even looking for you.
Yeah. Or is it the hubris of wanting to see if you can be under their nose?
Of course.
You know, because that would be the excitement to me. I'd like to be sort of right in front of them and see if I could. You know, that's why I would be a great serial killer, because I would want to leave clues.
Comedian serial killer, what a fantastic.
Because they always do in every book about serial killers.
Yeah, they always do it.
Sooner or later, they push their luck.
Yeah, they always do, but then they always have. Jack the Ripper sent those letters to the police.
For the last time today, I promise you, War and Peace, the final plot development, which is true, of course. General Kutuzov retreats from the Battle of Borodino and retreats beyond Moscow and says, "Have Moscow." And Russia and France go into Moscow and they can't. They've got nothing. They can't occupy it. They can't do anything with it. The winter comes, you know, and
but you also see this when people have these incredible downfalls because of the mistakes they make by the celebrities or whoever, and you sometimes think they've almost brought this on themselves. They've almost wanted it. They've almost willed it.
They want to be seen.
Well, Bill Clinton, Milo Yiannopoulos, I'm going to come across very, very arrogant, stroke psychopathic.
You don't have this.
I absolutely. If that were me, I would have sat there for the 4 weeks, and I would have got my £1 million or whatever.
Was there a cash incentive?
Do you know what? I can't be sure. Maybe not £1 million, I don't think. Like,
I absolutely would have just enjoyed that time, and I would have enjoyed winning that. And I would have had no desire to go back to it.
Do you have any sort of confessional type of aspect to you?
Not at all. Not at all.
What's the worst thing you've ever done?
I'm not telling you.
Can I ask you, does the Russian Orthodox, I know Konstantin's Jewish, but does the Russian Orthodox have confession as well?
They do, they do. No, I just want to win.
But Judaism
I'm very pragmatic. I don't know, because I'm not religious.
But then what do you do with it? So what do you do with it? I agree, I understand all of that. And by the way, I'm like uber competitive and all of that. I want to win. I wouldn't, there's no way I would leave the bar. No chance. I'd be exactly the same as you. And I know enough about the sort of mental psychologists, like, shut up about wanting to, wanting to be found. But it is a part of being human. It's a part of the fundamental stuff about being human, that you want to be seen and want to be found. I mean, like, you can say, oh, I want to win, but I'm not trying to make this religious. It's not a religious. It's not a religious thing. But like, people want to be loved. They want to be seen. They want to be recognised.
I would tell my wife.
And stand-up comedians.
I would tell my wife.
Yes, you tell your wife.
I would tell my dad.
Yes.
I would tell my mum.
Yes.
And they'd all be very happy for me.
Very good.
And that would be enough.
Well, isn't there part of it that you'd be thinking, this isn't very good television?
I wouldn't give a fuck about
that
television.
might also. I did wonder whether it was that, which is almost the least interesting. But I did wonder whether.
Because I think that's what people do when they're being hypnotised, isn't it? They perform because they feel they have to.
This guy himself, he was like, he just didn't come across like somebody who would give a damn if that was the case. What a fantastic chat! Thank you so much to my guests. Which makes me sound like I'm the host, which is like...
Well, you are the host.
You are the host.
But nevertheless, Giles Fraser, Konstantin Kisin, Andrew Doyle, I've been Simon Evans. We sincerely hope that, unable as you've been to contribute, you've felt involved. Because conversation is as good as an answer to what makes us human as I know of.
Yeah, exactly right. Here, dear boy.
Nostrovia!
Very nice to meet you. Very nice to meet you, Barry. Zastrovia, that's the Russian thing.
If there's one thing we learned tonight, it's that.
We're not Polish.
Yes, exactly.